I've been on this tokusatsu grind for about half a year now. Well, close to it at least. And that's just crazy to me. Like, damn, I've really become a full-on follower of this genre now. Who would have guessed I would have gotten back into superheroes this heavily? And Japanese superheroes at that. But that's what happens when these shows continue to be as good as they are. At least most of them do. But since we're continuing the trend of hopping between Sentai and Kamen Rider seasons, and with my current goal of watching these seasons in order, that might change in the future, who knows. We've made it to the second season of the Kamen Rider Heisei generation now, Kamen Rider Agito, the follow-up to Kamen Rider Kuga that acts as both a spiritual and literal sequel and successor to the prior season. And as was evident in my initial review of that season, I really adored Kamen Rider Kuga. The more I think about it, the more I believe that it's just my favorite season of anything I've watched out of the tokusatsu genre so far. It's incredibly rich in character, story, world building, and spreading the message of kindness that is so prevalent in Kamen Rider as a franchise that I see it as the perfect statue of what these series are all about in terms of its style and values. So hearing that Agito was basically the successor of this season had me very interested, to say the least. A lot of Kamen Rider fans don't exactly love the fact that Kuga has basically never gotten a true reintroduction due to Joe Odagiri's refusal to reprise the character, but I personally like the fact that Godai's story and the main story of Kuga starts and ends with that season. It doesn't have much of anything else left to say after all. It doesn't need spin-offs, crossovers, movies, anything like that. Kamen Rider Kuga is perfect as a standalone thing to me. Maybe it's because I'm not a true toku nerd just yet, but I sure as hell do love Kamen Rider Kuga, and I love that it's just kind of its own thing, and so I didn't really want Agito to be this literal sequel and successor to the season. I wanted it to be its own thing, and thankfully it is. It is exactly that. Kamen Rider Agito is its own thing. For the most part. We'll get into that later. It stands on its own pretty well with its own unique concepts and characters that stand out very distinctly from the prior season, for better and for worse. The season does start out a bit samey to its predecessor, with loads of references to the UL-ups from Kuga, and even referencing Kuga itself to being the basis for the police research in the series. But as it goes on, past around the episode 10 mark, when we start getting more involvement from the side cast and secondary and tertiary writers, it becomes basically its own thing entirely, basically dropping any and all relevance between the Kuga connection. And I like that. It takes its time to forge its own identity, for sure, but once it does, it's pretty damn strong. One thing that this season has is the return of multiple writers in one season, rather than just focusing on the titular Kamen Rider. Here we have 3, technically more, but once again we will get to that later, which is Kamen Rider Agito, Kamen Rider G3, later G3X, and Kamen Rider Gills. And they are all, let me just say, these guys could not be any more different from one another. And look, I'm just gonna say it right out the gate. My favorite character in this entire season is Kamen Rider Gills, Ryo Ashihara, but we won't talk about him yet as much as I want to. We should go over Agito first, aka Shoichi Sugami. And the reason why I'm going to put an asterisk over his name is because of, the mystery of his character. You see, Shoichi falls down the trope of the amnesiac character, someone who begins the season not knowing anything about his past despite the fact it holds basically all the answers to every question that the characters could be wondering regarding Kamen Riders, the unknowns, and the incident that brought this all forth. There's only one thing he knows, which is that he is Kamen Rider Agito, and no matter what, he cannot stop fighting the unknowns. It is his purpose for the time being. They play him off as a bit of an idiot, but really I just see him as a goofball. He acts like a kid a lot, but you can't expect much else. He's still pretty competent at what he does know. So whilst he's certainly ignorant and curious a lot of the time, you can't really pin that on him because, again, he doesn't remember anything. He's easy to love because he's a very silly character, the silliest of the 3 leads I've seen so far, and his compassion for others without any second thought sticks with me as very likable. And that core of his character doesn't doesn't go away, even when he inevitably gets his memories back. There are moments where he doubts his standing and purpose as a Kamen Rider, and whether or not it's right for him to be one considering the nature of his powers, but that's only ever a hurdle for him to overcome and realize the full and true purpose of why he has these powers to begin with, which is to save those that once saved him before, to fight beside the ones that have been there for him when he was the one in need, because without them, he wouldn't be here. Without the sacrifices others have made for him, he wouldn't be alive. So it's his duty to keep them safe from these beings that only he has the power to defeat. I will say that his amnesia plot does drag out a little longer than I would have hoped for, as there's an arc midway through the season where Shoichi temporarily gets his memories back and begins to peel away at the mysteries we've been curious about all this time. But then he just forgets again after 2 episodes, and we just move along as if it didn't happen for at least another 15 to 20, which was just a little frustrating for me. One thing this show definitely struggles with for me is how stagnant it can feel at times. Shoichi's subplot is only a smaller part of it, because I think my biggest gripe with it has to be regarding the G3 unit and its characters. Not that I don't like them or anything, but their stories are always usually the least interesting to me, especially earlier on. This group kind of follows the same formula of Hikawa getting his ass beat because the G3 is weak as hell, Hojo accusing them of incompetence, a bitter back and forth between the detectives, Hojo gaining control, which he then fucks up, then giving Hikawa and his unit control of the G3 again so he can get his ass kicked again, and the cycle continues. And that happens a lot. It doesn't last forever though, as things with their unit and the police force starts getting way more interesting with the introduction of the G3X, which is when Hikawa finally becomes competent as an actual rider. I waited very long for that, but at least my boy got something eventually. It's cool to see a more non-traditional Kamen Rider who doesn't really have any of the cyber or supernatural powers, and instead just relies on what's basically an Iron Man suit that he can't access in a convenient way, which leads to him having to improvise a lot. So while his storylines aren't always the most interesting parts of the show, Hikawa is a really nice character that I enjoyed seeing a lot, especially in the rare occasions where he was interacting with Shoichi personally. One of the best mini arcs in the show is when Shoichi's identity of Agito is revealed, and Hikawa is the one person everyone avoids telling because they know just how humiliated and heartbroken he would be to see that the guy who he treats as a hopeless idiot is actually the hero he's been idolizing for this entire time. It was hilarious, and his reaction to learning the truth was priceless. His actual arc of overcoming his envy of the Agitos and accepting his role and purpose as a human was also handled very well too. Seeing him put aside his naivety and understand that he can still be a hero without any special power was an arc that felt pretty new so far, so I liked that a lot. But as I said before, neither of these dudes are my favorite characters. Nope, not even close. Neither of them can compare to my true GOAT, Mr. Ryo Ashihara, Kamen Rider Gills. This guy right here, that's the demon. That's my glorious king, my GOAT. My favorite Agito rider and one of my favorite Kamen Riders in general as of right now. Call me an emo, I don't care. I love this guy and loved him from the very beginning. You just can't help but feel for the guy, as when we first meet him, he loses literally everything. His dream, his father figure, the love of his life, all of it has ousted him as a freak for the monstrous transformation he's received as Kamen Rider Gills. All entirely up to circumstances he doesn't understand nor can he control. A form that embraces all of the pent-up rage and anger in him. And while at first he doesn't know how to properly use this power and definitely uses it against the wrong people at times, he vows to use that power to protect and save people, to save the same people who fear him, to protect a world that's left him behind. He's one of those quiet, tragic characters that has become a bit cliche now, but damn do I love this character archetype, the lonesome outcast who keeps the values of good, even if his exterior doesn't always showcase it. One of my favorite episodes in the series is a flashback episode that tells the story between Ashihara and a young boy he meets, a young boy who discovers his identity as Gills, and yet instead of running in fear, instead of screaming or outing him as a freak, the kid looks up to him, thanks him, and treats him as his hero. They share an emotional breakthrough together before Ashihara returns the boy to the church of his parents' memorial, prior victims of the unknown that Gills had defeated. It's a simple, standalone story that offers an emotional perspective, giving Ashihara what's basically his only moment of solace up to this point in the show, because before this episode, he just could not catch a break, and sadly, he doesn't get much of one later on either. He survives and he's able to live a peaceful life, but even right at the very end, he's still losing everything dear to him, and that makes me kinda sad. I was a bit disappointed to see him still alone by the end of the show, even though I don't necessarily hate the decision. I just wish this guy got a bit of a happier ending after everything he went through. And let me just say, his rider form is so goddamn sick. A Kamen Rider with a moving mouth when he screams, tendrils, and bodily weapons grown through the power of his rage, and the most brutal and vicious attacks in the show by far, in a suit and transformation entirely based in body horror and grotesque animalistic imagery. It's the coolest thing ever. I don't know how anyone couldn't find this awesome. I haven't seen Kamen Rider Shin, but lots of people point to this as a sort of prototype for what Gills became, and that just leaves me even more excited to watch those films. If you guys couldn't tell, I really like Gills. I really like him. I really like the guy. It does feel just a bit unfair how good Gills is in terms of action, because every other rider just doesn't compare for me. I found his battles far more entertaining than G3 and Agito's battles, honestly. And this is where I get back to the Kuga comparison, because one of my main things with Agito is just how Kuga-like he is. Even outside of his suit looking almost the exact same, and his transformations and powers at the beginning are just Kuga's powers. Like, he turns different colors and each color summons a different weapon and a different speciality in battle. And unlike Kuga, who had to unlock all this stuff as the show goes on, Agito just kinda has all this from the beginning. He can just do this stuff without struggle. And while it shows his strength pretty well, it's just not as fun to me. Not to mention, I think Kuga's forms just look way better anyways. Even Agito's final form, which is still pretty cool, don't get me wrong, is like the first time he doesn't just feel like Kuga 2 for me. I kinda wish we got just a bit more stuff like this and a bit more variety in his colored forms than just changing his chest pad colors, since his outfit has way less room for the colors than Kuga anyway. But you know what, I'll try to hold off with the comparisons. I still like Agito as a writer a lot, I just feel like he lacks a bit of individual spice. He's just not as special to me. Gills is my writer that I'll remember the most from this, but Agito isn't forgettable in any way at all. He's just not my favorite. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Ryuki wasn't my favorite in Kamen Rider Ryuki either, even though I like Ryuki a bit more than I like Agito, so it's not like a bad thing. I still like the character, I still like Shoichi a lot, but I think you guys can get where I'm coming from. Overall, I think Kamen Rider Agito is a strong series that has just a little bit of trouble standing on its own 2 feet, but it's still strong nonetheless with some pretty great characters, transformations, and action. I really like the whole subplot with the superpowered beings and how the unknowns are just afraid of them. It's very interesting to me and I find it very cool, even if it does kinda have some issues. It didn't pull me as hard as Kuga or Ryuki did, but I still liked it quite a bit. It's a very, very, very solid season that I will revisit eventually in the future because it's very good, it's very entertaining. Even though there are parts that drag, there was never a point where I was bored in the 50 episodes that I watched. So even though I have some criticisms of the show, I still found it to be a very, very, very strong Kamen Rider season. And that's basically all I have to talk about in this video. I didn't really get to go too much into the story, but that's just because I don't have that much to say about it rather than just the characters. Agito is still a very good season and I still recommend watching it. I've really enjoyed all of the 3 Kamen Rider seasons I've watched so far, and next season I'm going to be watching is Kamen Rider Faiz, which I'm very excited to watch because this dude just looks cool as hell. But with that being said, that's all I have to talk about in this video. Comment down below your favorite Agito rider if you have one, and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I will see you all next time. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.